No one expected the writer behind a campaign that reached millions of views to be the first person cut from the company. But that's how I hit rock bottom, not because I did something wrong, but because I dared to do what was right in a system that preferred pretending. My name is Teala Dunn. At 28, I was pushed out of the very company I co-founded by the people I once called teammates, simply because I didn't know how to manipulate. When I entered the media world, I had no connections, no capital, just one thing, the ability to read people. I couldn't code. I wasn't skilled at negotiating with investors, but I knew one truth: emotion is the strongest currency on social media. I wrote taglines that made people cry, product descriptions that made customers feel seen, and campaigns that prompted people to click share rather than buy now. I didn't need to shout for attention. I let the work speak for itself. Dayglow Media, the company we built, started in a shared apartment in Silver Lake with a broken heater and an old electric kettle. I wrote the very first client brief. I coined the term emotional marketing when every other agency was still chasing numbers. But I never imagined that the very values I brought would one day be the first things stripped away when success finally came knocking. When Dayglow caught the eye of an investment fund, I was still working 16-hour days to meet deadlines for 3 major brands. I wasn't in the room for the funding pitch. I wasn't included in the press release introducing the founding team. In fact, I didn't even know that the article titled "The 3 Young Talents Behind Dayglow" had gone live until it was too late to react. They named Jaden, Noah, and Serena. I wasn't surprised to see Jaden's name first. He always had a charming way with words, always knew how to make people believe he was the core of everything. What broke me was Serena. I had once seen her as a sister, stayed up countless nights with her discussing the company's vision, taught her how to write copy that spoke directly to the reader's heart. I had sent her the first draft of the script for our Lost Trust campaign, the video that garnered over 2 million shares in a week and secured us a deal with the biggest skincare brand on the West Coast. Yet in every company post, every feature article, every internal announcement, my name was nowhere to be found. I was cropped out of team photos. My role was reduced to content support. When I asked Serena, she avoided my eyes and mumbled something about investor media strategy and we'll sort it out later. I've never been quick to anger. But those following nights, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't rage, I was confused, unsure what I had done to deserve this. The people I once shared every idea with, once split cup noodles with when the budget ran dry, now looked at me like just another employee. They held private meetings, excluded me from key decisions, even revoked my access to major client accounts. I tried to endure, convincing myself this was just a transition phase. I reminded myself I was here for the passion, for the clients, for the people inspired by the campaigns I created. But one October afternoon, as I was editing the final cut of a video for a nonprofit collaboration, Jaden called me into a meeting room. There was no Serena, no one else, just Jaden and a neat stack of papers on the table. "We've decided to eliminate the strategic content position," he said, in a tone as casual as if he were announcing a parking space change. I blinked. "I'm a co-founder," I replied. Jaden didn't flinch. "There's no contract saying that. Teala, and you know, everything has to be clean for the investor. They want a streamlined structure." I let out a dry laugh. That streamlined structure meant cutting out the person who laid the foundation. I hadn't signed anything official at the start. I believed in relationships, in promises. My mistake was trusting too long without anything to hold on to. I left the office with empty hands. My desk was cleared in 20 minutes. My email account deactivated the moment the elevator doors closed. No goodbyes, no questions. Just one message from Serena, a single line. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I returned to my small rental in West Hollywood, where the morning coffee on the kitchen counter had gone cold. My phone lit up, my mother asking when I'd send this month's support money, my sister sending wedding dress photos and complaining about the budget. I didn't know how to tell them I had just been erased by the very company I helped build. I sat in silence for hours, staring out the dusty window, feeling hollow. It wasn't just a job I lost faith in what I once held sacred: friendship, effort, true value. I had believed that if I just did things right and gave it my best, everything would work out. But I had forgotten that in this world, doing the right thing is sometimes not enough to keep what matters. I didn't fall because I was weak. I fell because I wasn't prepared. And that fall would be the thing that redefined everything that came next. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All I knew was what was stolen would not remain hidden forever. I don't remember the exact moment I began to rise again. It wasn't some grand awakening or an inspiring quote that jolted me back. It came quietly, like a foggy morning after a sleepless night. I was still sitting at the same old kitchen table, watching the light slip through the blinds, the coffee next to my laptop long cold, and I realized I had stayed silent for far too long. There were no more tears, no hope that someone would return to make things right, just a growing clarity in my chest that felt sharp and calm. I reopened old files, campaign drafts, outlines of ideas I had once sent out, the same ones that helped build Dayglow Media, yet had my name erased from every trace. I wasn't trying to grieve. I needed to remind myself that what I had done was real, and that the value I brought wasn't something I made up. In the days that followed, I imposed discipline not to succeed, but to simply keep from collapsing. I woke up on time, ate regular meals, and rewrote every accomplishment like I was stacking bricks to rebuild a wall that had been shattered. I spent a whole week quietly reconnecting with old contacts, not asking for jobs, just checking in. I updated my LinkedIn profile, not to flaunt achievements, but to let the world know I hadn't disappeared. I wrote a short blog about being betrayed in my old company, no names. No blame, just reflections on what the fall had taught me. I expected nothing from it. I just needed to breathe again. A week later, I received a message from someone who used to work in the marketing department of a well-known skincare brand. She had been a client during a previous Dayglow campaign, and this time. She asked if I was open to freelancing on a new project they were struggling to manage. There was no contract, no office, just a string of emails, a sparse brief, and a 3-day deadline. I said yes, not for the money, but because I needed to feel myself doing what I was good at again. 3 days later, I sent over the proposal, a full copy deck, and a simple storyboard. They replied in 6 hours, saying they felt like they had seen their brand come alive in the lines I wrote. That project marked the start of a slow, quiet series of opportunities. I didn't post anything online, didn't tell anyone except Yvette, my closest friend from college. She lent me a corner of her Koreatown apartment to work from and made me instant noodles with boiled eggs every night. Yvette didn't ask many questions. One night, after watching me work past midnight for the 5th day in a row, she simply said, "Teala, if you're doing this again, I know it's going to be one hell of a comeback." I smiled faintly, but said nothing. The word comeback still felt too far away, like something reserved for celebrities, while I was still typing on a chipped desk in a room with no air conditioning. But I knew she was right. No one was coming to save me. And if I was going to stand back up, I would do it quietly, without applause, in the following days. I started researching the industry again. Trends in media were shifting fast, but one thing remained timeless: real emotion. I began planning a personal project, a small platform dedicated to brand storytelling rooted in authenticity, a place where I could connect creative freelancers with small businesses struggling post-pandemic. I named it Threadline because I believed every story begins with an emotional thread, if only you have the courage to follow it. No investors, no one telling me it would work. I just began with what I had: writing skills, a network of former clients, and belief in the power of sincere storytelling. I built a simple landing page, ran a test ad campaign using the last $100 in my account, and reached out to freelancers I had once worked with to help me create the first case studies. A week passed without signups. 2 weeks later, I got an email from a small family-owned candle business in Austin. They wanted to try promoting their products through short videos. I accepted, wrote the script, connected a young director and a stylist I knew from my Dayglow days, and edited the first cut myself using free software. That video gained over 300,000 views on TikTok within 10 days, and their sales tripled the following month. The business owner messaged to say it was the first time they felt their product had been expressed without trying too hard. From there, a quiet ripple began, not loud, but steady. Every successful campaign was a small affirmation, not to anyone else, but to myself. I no longer needed to prove anything to Dayglow, but I needed to prove to myself that I could move forward without them. Still, as things began to breathe again, challenges crept in. One evening in mid-March, I got an email from a prospective client I had previously pitched. They thanked me, but said they had just signed with Dayglow Media for a similar campaign. They added, almost casually, that the proposal Dayglow submitted was nearly 90% identical to mine. I sat frozen in front of the screen, rereading the message, heart slowing like it was bracing for an incoming storm. I hadn't posted the original anywhere, only emailed it directly, and only one person knew the details before I hit send: Serena. I didn't feel confused this time, just cold. They were still watching me, still treating me like a free idea bank they could draw from when convenient. I didn't know who they used to execute it, didn't have hard evidence, but I knew my own writing style, and I knew they couldn't have created that themselves. I didn't call anyone. I didn't complain. I quietly shifted strategies. Every new client now signed an NDA. Every idea sent out was time-stamped and logged with recipient information. I started building an internal system to track every interaction and archive the creative trail behind every proposal. I realized that to survive in this industry, creativity wasn't enough. I had to be solid. Trust, once broken, was already a scar, but I wouldn't let it become a wound reopened. I learned how to protect myself in silence, not with words, but with systems, with documentation, with preparation. I said nothing to Yvette. I just sent one more email to a freelance-friendly lawyer I had met at a small workshop, asking about copyright protection processes in case of plagiarism. The lawyer replied within 3 hours. I printed the documents, filed them neatly in a folder, not because I planned to use them now, but because I needed to be ready for the day they crossed the line again. I began to feel, with increasing clarity, that the layers of dust from the past were being quietly swept away, not by scandal or exposure, but by the steady pace of what I had been quietly building. Threadline, which had started as a modest landing page, had grown into a place where small businesses turned when they could no longer trust flashy campaigns. In less than 4 months, I had completed over 12 projects, each carrying its own fingerprint, short videos told in the client's own voice, words that didn't rely on shock tactics, but instead struck the right emotional chord. I never advertised myself, yet the name Teala began surfacing in professional circles. Some asked if I offered writing classes. Others said they recognized my style in a viral Instagram clip. And a few mentioned they had worked with Dayglow, but now wanted to collaborate with me. I didn't turn anyone away, but I didn't accept every offer either. I chose clients carefully, not out of pride, but because I knew what I had, couldn't be diluted just to chase money. I wasn't racing anyone. I was walking a different path. But clearly, someone had started to feel uneasy. One Monday morning, while I was drafting a proposal for a startup focused on community education, Yvette stepped out of her room with an odd look and an iPad in her hand. "Teala, you should see this," she said, handing me a post from a forum for creatives. An anonymous account had published a thread titled, "Beware of Content Providers Without Official Licenses." The post was vague, no names mentioned, but the details made it unmistakable they were targeting me, a solo freelancer, focused on emotional storytelling, no visible industry certifications, formerly linked to a media company with a copyright lawsuit. I didn't hold an industry certificate. I hadn't registered a company, but tying me to a copyright case was a blatant lie, and I knew where it came from. Jaden had always preferred indirect attacks. He didn't need to name names, he just had to plant doubt. And people would connect the dots on their own. I didn't react. I kept working. But days later, a prospective client messaged me saying they wanted to postpone our project due to reassessing some reputational concerns regarding content producers. I didn't blame them. I just quietly added a new item to my plan, fortify my legal foundation. I returned to the law office where I had first asked about copyright protections. This time, I asked them to help register my business, draft standardized contracts for Threadline services, and prepare a legal response template in case of further defamation. The lawyer nodded and said something I've never forgotten. Freelancers don't need a shield, but if you want to last, you need armor. I understood. This time, I wouldn't just be a good writer. I would know how to defend myself. 2 weeks later, I received an email from someone I didn't expect, Serena. The subject line was brief. Need to meet. It's important. I hesitated for a few minutes, then agreed on the condition that we meet somewhere public. We sat at an outdoor cafe in Santa Monica, the weather cool, the sun soft, but her eyes held no warmth. She looked thinner, lips cracked, dark circles under her eyes. She didn't look like a partner at a thriving company. She got straight to the point. "Jaden is trying to sell the company," she said. I frowned, and she continued. "The investors want out. A few major clients just canceled their contracts after reading a LinkedIn post about Dayglow stealing ideas from freelancers." I stayed silent. Serena sighed. "They think the writer of that post is connected to you." I looked at her, not speaking, just wrapping my hands around a cold paper coffee cup. I didn't write that post. But if someone felt robbed and decided to speak up, they have that right. She nodded, quietly. Then she slid a document across the table. It was a proposal to collaborate again. Jaden wanted to acquire a stake in Threadline for a joint media venture. I skimmed it, folded it shut, and set it down. I don't need a reward for what was stolen from me. Serena stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. She said nothing, then gave a small nod. "Well, if you ever need anything, just say so." I didn't reply. I stood, leaving the coffee untouched. I didn't need belated help. I didn't need their validation. I hadn't come back to reclaim honor. I already had it, just in a different way. But the storm hadn't passed yet. A week later, I received an email from a tech journalist in San Diego. She was writing a piece on the trend of freelancers rebuilding their reputations through success after being burned in the media industry and wanted to interview me. I hesitated, then agreed on the condition that my former company not be named. The article was published a week later, titled, "From Setback to Brand the Journey of a Copywriter Pushed Out of the Game." No drama, no scandal, just a quiet recounting of what happened, but it spread faster than I expected. After the article, 3 major partners reached out to explore long-term collaboration. A nonprofit requested a campaign concept to support their fundraising. A university sent an invitation for me to speak to marketing students. I said yes to all of them, not because I needed the spotlight, but because I understood that every time I told my story with care, I was laying another brick for someone else to step on in the future. And just as I expected, Jaden didn't stay quiet. One Friday evening, I received a letter from his lawyer. The wording was vague, but the message was clear. They demanded I cease using certain creative strategies that allegedly resembled Dayglow's original framework. They claimed that because I was once an internal team member, I might have taken proprietary material with me. I wasn't surprised. This was their last desperate move, a final swing from people losing their grip. I forwarded everything to my attorney project archives, meeting notes, original data proof that nothing I had done violated any rights. Meanwhile, I published a post on LinkedIn. I didn't name names. I didn't assign blame. I simply shared the journey of building something from scratch and why the right to create should never belong to a company, but to the person behind the idea. That post resonated, not because I was famous, but because it struck a chord with others who had once been silent, just like I was. It wasn't applause or praise that made me realize I had reached a different threshold. It was the stillness before a storm, the kind that doesn't frighten you anymore because you've already stood through worse. That morning, I woke up with a strange clarity in my chest. Not worry, not anger, just a quiet certainty. I had endured enough shadowy attacks, enough vague insinuations, cold emails, skeptical glances, and yet I was still here, still working, still trusted by people who knew me not through rumors, but through the integrity of what I delivered. Threadline was no longer an experiment. It had become a compact but resilient ecosystem, a place where I could control the pace, the quality, and the direction. I took on a campaign for a new community education platform in Houston, where the goal was to tell real stories about equal learning opportunities. The project stretched nearly 2 months and required me to fly frequently between California and Texas. But I didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was working under pressure. I felt like I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. I no longer felt the urge to prove anything. I had started doing what I loved without fearing theft, invisibility, or suppression. I had learned how to create boundaries and how to let those boundaries quietly protect me. But the real turning point didn't come from a contract. It came from an unexpected invitation. One late night, just as I sent off the final draft to a client and was about to shut down my laptop, a new email came in. The subject line read, "Invitation to speak at WMC Annual Summit, Women in Media and Creativity." I thought it was a mistake, but when I opened it, the details were clear. They were inviting me to be the keynote speaker at a panel called "Rising from Rubble When Women in Creative Fields Rewrite the Map." I read it again and again, unsure if what I felt was disbelief or hesitation. I wasn't famous. I didn't have hundreds of thousands of followers. I had never spoken in front of a crowd. But there was a line in the message that held me still. "We've been following your work for the past year, not for the drama, but for the way you've turned harm into value that serves a quiet but meaningful community." I sat in silence, the screen glowing in my lap, the room lit only by a dim lamp. Everything I once thought was small or temporary had somehow touched others in a way deeper than any promotional campaign ever could. I said yes, not to retell old wounds, but to mark a shift that I was no longer following behind. I was ready to step forward. The weeks that followed were full of rehearsals, script edits, and the careful selection of stories to share, not for dramatics, not to evoke pity. I wanted the talk to focus not on how I had been betrayed, but on how I had walked through the feeling of being discarded and still held onto the parts of myself untouched by resentment. I thought of Jaden and Serena while writing, not as wounds, but as people who had once been real during a time when I, too, was still figuring out who I was. They were part of the journey, even if they would never define me when the event day arrived. I walked onto the stage in a crowded room, the lights not blinding, no cheers, just a silence that felt like a space being held. I spoke plainly. I talked about a night in October when I was let go from the company I helped build, about how I used to be afraid of opening emails, of sending out proposals, thinking I no longer deserved a seat at the table. Then I told them about the first time I received a thank you message from a client. I had never met someone who said the words I wrote gave them a reason to keep their small business alive for one more month in the middle of a crisis. The room was still, no tears, no roaring applause, but then someone stood, and then another, not because I was brilliant, but because they saw themselves in the fragments I had gathered and shaped into something whole. After the event ended, an older woman approached me. She was a strategic advisor for a grant fund, supporting women-led media projects. She asked if I'd be interested in expanding Threadline into a training model that could partner with nonprofits. I didn't answer right away, but I knew that invitation wasn't luck. It came because I had endured long enough and quietly enough to finally walk into spaces without being consumed by the noise. That night, I returned to Yvette's apartment, the same place where I had once curled up on her sofa, lost and directionless. She didn't ask anything. She just handed me a glass of wine she'd already poured. "You did it again." She smiled. I nodded. And for the first time, that sentence didn't feel like comfort. It felt like truth. I opened my laptop and returned to the Threadline dashboard. The numbers were still rising, slow but steady. I added a new section, Storytelling Academy, an online space where I could share everything I had learned about starting from scratch, about doing emotional branding with integrity, and about rebuilding trust that had once been broken. No more hiding, no more anonymous posts. This was the moment I put my name on everything I created, not for revenge, but for something far simpler. I had returned, and this time, I wasn't stepping back. I can't quite pinpoint the moment my so-called comeback happened, because when your return is built on results, no one claps right away, no spotlight beams down on your face, no background music swells like in the movies. Instead, it all happens quietly, steadily, step by step, and that very steadiness becomes the clearest proof that I've made it far from the place that once broke me. Threadline gradually became a familiar name in the community media space, not because of big funding or flashy teams, but because it genuinely built a bridge between brands and their listeners. I still ran operations from Yvette's small spare room, even though I could now afford my own space, maybe because a part of me still felt more grounded in humility than in polished offices. Another part of me still hadn't forgotten what it felt like to walk out of my old company with a light backpack and a heavy heart. But now, I entered client meetings as a founder, not a fallback, and I signed every contract with my name printed under owner. I didn't need to argue. I let the numbers speak. Threadline's second quarter revenue tripled year over year. Over 60% of projects came from repeat clients. And the monthly internal newsletter I wrote was now being shared among freelance circles as a template. Meanwhile, Dayglow Media no longer held the image it once clung to. A month after my interview, a major agency announced they had ended their partnership with Dayglow, citing a misalignment of values. A week later, word spread that Jaden had stepped down from leadership, and Serena had revoked access for nearly half of their freelance team. The industry whispered about a rushed restructure to salvage investor trust. I didn't get involved. I didn't comment. But one day, I received an email from a former creative team member at Dayglow. He thanked me for my WMC talk, saying he had once believed he was the only one feeling lost in that company's culture, and that seeing me speak up gave him the courage to leave and open his own studio. I read that message on an ordinary evening while revising a campaign script for a nonprofit in New Jersey. I didn't care whether Jaden had read any of the articles or how Serena might be reacting to the shifts that were forcing her out of the spotlight. What mattered to me wasn't their downfall, but the liberation of people like me who had once been smothered under the name of team. They were paying the price not because I fought back, but because the way they treated others was finally catching up with them in the most natural way. No one was destroyed, but an empire built on extraction eventually crumbles under the quiet weight of its own injustice. As Threadline gained more attention, new and unexpected doors opened. A digital media company invited me to become the content director for a channel that tells real-life stories. An education fund proposed naming a scholarship after me for young writers with financial need. And an old client, once rejected by Dayglow for having too small a budget, returned to say they only wanted to work with someone who had made them feel truly seen. I didn't take every offer, but I made time for what moved me. I taught a small online class every Wednesday night, sharing how to tell stories that don't just sell, but build lasting relationships. I attended industry conferences more as an observer than a speaker. I declined a few interview requests because I didn't want to become a recycled narrative used to stir sympathy. I didn't need people to think I was strong. I just needed not to fall back into the version of myself that had to ask permission to do what felt right. Yvette remained the only one who had witnessed the entire arc from being pushed out to being invited back under different terms. One night, as we sat on the balcony of the new apartment I had just moved into, she turned to me with a smile and asked, "If you had the choice, would you go back to Dayglow?" I thought for a moment and shook my head. No, because if I hadn't been betrayed, I never would have left. And if I hadn't left, I wouldn't have learned where my real value is. Yvette said nothing more. We just sat there, glasses of red wine in hand, the breeze brushing past, the city below humming as if nothing had happened. But I knew, for me, everything had changed. Endings are never events. They are sensations. I knew I had truly closed that chapter when I could mention Dayglow without hearing pain echo in my chest. When I saw Serena on a virtual panel, sitting in a corner of the screen, without the shine or the power she once carried over me. When I heard Jaden was trying to fund a new project, but no one in the media world seemed willing to invest their trust again. I felt no triumph. I just saw things settling into their rightful places. What they lost wasn't just reputation. It was the chance to begin again with integrity. And what I gained wasn't a new empire. It was the peace to rebuild without the need for revenge. Success as revenge isn't about bringing others down. It's about showing that you didn't need them to rise. I once thought lost trust was the end. Now I understand. Sometimes it's just an ellipsis at the beginning of an entirely different story. And if there is one thing that remains with me after all of this, it is patience. Patience to stay quiet when it's needed. patience not to lash out right away, patience to do each small task well, even when no one is watching, because sometimes it's the smallest things that lead to the biggest changes. I no longer need the crowd's approval. I only need to believe that what I'm doing is right. And if someone asked me today how to survive the quiet blows of life and work, I might just smile and ask them, have you ever stayed quiet long enough to really hear what you want?